Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. Outlaws of Thunder Junction is a gift that keeps on giving. I already told you what happens in the set's main story and in the 2 epilogue chapters, which leaves us with the 4 side stories. Self-contained adventures that give a little more texture to the characters and events on this plane. If you want to read them for yourself, I have a link down below, right next to the one for Into the AM, the sponsor of this video. They've got a Memorial Day sale until May 29th, which is great because they also just launched their new spring collection. That's right, Into the AM is more than just amazing graphic and basic tees. Now they've got relaxed button-ups and daily shorts, perfect for staying comfortable and stylish during the warmer months. Get yourself 30% off site-wide during the sale and save 10% anytime with my link or by entering promo code MAGICARCANUM at checkout. These are going to be my new everyday staples, the basic lands of my wardrobe, the perfect accessory for game night, or the next pre-release. Check out Into the AM and see how their new spring collection could turn you into the best-dressed wizard on the battlefield. Okay, now let's talk about what else happens in the cowboy hat set. Yeehaw! The first side story is called No Tells, and it introduces us to a character named Yuma, who has come to Thunder Junction to create a new life after struggling to find happiness on New Capenna. Unfortunately for Yuma, his old life isn't quite done with him, and a former friend and partner in crime named Elnor shows up at Yuma's saloon looking for revenge. The two fight and nearly destroy the building, with the action broken up by Yuma reflecting on how their actions and choices brought them to this exact moment. We learn that Yuma was a riveteer on New Capenna, but wanted more out of life. They teamed up with some friends to try and build something better, but fell into an unsatisfactory life of crime. Yeah, that sounds like New Capenna, all right. Anyway, Yuma even went to the best body man in the city and transitioned to male with the support of his friends, but even then he felt trapped by the glitz and glamour of the crime-ridden metropolis. So Yuma took some money and ran through an omen path, looking for that fresh start, and found it on Thunder Junction, along with a baby cactus folk named Kiri. Inspired by Kiri's ability to flourish in this harsh environment, Yuma invested what he had into building his own saloon, which brings us back to the present, in which Elnor has come to ask, "Where's the money?" She is bitter about Yuma abandoning their vision on New Capenna. They were supposed to find success together or die trying, but Yuma walked out on that, so now he has to pay. Yuma says the secret to his success has always been moving with speed and no tells, meaning he doesn't tighten his muscles or telegraph his next move until he absolutely has to. Even so, he's a perfect match for Elnor, who is more of a charming rogue-type character, but she's also got a demon snake wrapped around her arm and breathing fire everywhere, which is quickly reducing the saloon to charcoal. Suddenly, a rainstorm sweeps through and puts out the flames, giving Yuma and Elnor a chance to talk through their frustrations. Yuma says he is sorry and agrees walking out was probably wrong, but he says he would absolutely do it again. He invites Elnor to kill him and take over his saloon, but that won't get her the money she's after, at least not anytime soon. Realizing he's right, Elnor decides to let go of the past and forgive Yuma, while Kiri suddenly sprouts vines and flowers that fill the broken holes in the saloon, giving it an entirely new vibe, which pleases Yuma just fine. I think this story really shows the appeal of Thunder Junction as a plane. It is a new land full of opportunity and promise, especially for folks in the multiverse who are fed up with their current life or situation. Yuma did his best to find happiness on New Capenna, but Even with supportive friends and breaking away from the grind of the Riveteers, he still wanted more, and his actions brought him to the frontier, where he could build a new life. It's an interesting hybrid, too, because he acknowledges his design for the saloon is heavily inspired by life on New Capenna, until most of it gets burned down by Elnor, at which point it gets overtaken by Kiri's flora in a not-so-subtle display of Thunder Junction's own power. And we see more of that power in our second side story, which is called Blood is Thicker Than Venom and is focused on Annie Flash. Things start with her leaving the bed of a man named Jody, who invites Annie to spend the night, but Annie says she's not looking for anything serious, and besides, she is needed elsewhere. She heads home to her ranch and checks in on her nephew Tommy, who is in his bed and clearly suffering from a lot of pain. You might remember in the main story, we were told that Tommy was tortured by Akul as payback for Annie stealing from the Hellspur gang. Annie uncorks a bottle of smoky blue medicine and lets Tommy inhale some, which eases his suffering, but they are running low on supply, so Annie pledges to head into town at dawn to pick up more of what she calls the most powerful pain reliever this side of the multiverse. Morning comes, and Annie makes her way over to Saddlebrush and picks up more medicine at the pharmacy, when suddenly a giant rattleworm winds its way through the town square. It passes through with only minor casualties, but the townsfolk are obviously scared of this thing, and none of them are really brave enough to do anything about it, so Annie steps up and says she'll just go kill it so everyone can rest easy. A young boy offers to come with her because he wants to protect his younger sister, so he and Annie head out into the wilds to chase down this worm. The boy, Bo, explains how he and his sister are orphans now after their parents died, and they don't really have anyone else here, and they're trying to look out for each other. Annie, of course, hears all of this and reflects on her own situation with Tommy and what it means to be part of a family, especially out here in the wilds of Thunder Junction. Eventually, the pair catch up to the worm and find there are actually two, a parent and a baby. Annie decides it would be cruel to kill them both, so instead, her and Bo lead them further away from the town to an area with more prey and less innocent people. The town of Saddlebrush is actually happy with this solution, mostly because it avoided any unnecessary bloodshed. But when Annie returns to her ranch, she finds Tommy is ready to leave. He's decided he wants to go back home to his native plane. He says it is to get proper medical care rather than relying on this blue smoke, but reading between the lines, it seems like he no longer wants to be a burden on his aunt, who deserves to find happiness here on Thunder Junction. Now, we know she ultimately gets found by Oko and dragged into his plot to rob the vault in Tarnation, but for this moment, in this side story, which comes before all of that, there is a glimmer of possibility for Annie. She could have continued to see Jody and develop a relationship, or she could have adopted Bo and his sister Mira, who clearly needs someone watching out for them. But it seems she just kinda minds her own business until she stumbles across the wrecked carriage at the start of the main story, which reignites her feud with Akul and drives her motivation for joining Oko's Outlaws. Don't get me wrong, I really liked getting to spend more time with Annie and understanding her commitment to taking care of Tommy and seeing all of the sacrifices she was making out of guilt for his situation. That really developed her own character. But I'm not convinced this needed to be a whole side story. A lot of this could have been woven into the main story, like if Annie had faced down the rattleworm there, instead of finding the wrecked carriage, she still would have been supporting the town the same way she did when she donated the contents of the strongbox. And then, after talking with Oko, we'd see her go dig up her thunder rifle, which would tell us more about how dangerous Akul is, right? Like, if she was willing to go out after the worm with just her sidearm, but the thought of Akul makes her pull out her big guns, That would tell us a lot about what Annie sees as a real threat. Even though, going by the cards, the worm is technically more scary. Anyway, side story 3, A Long Way from Home. Let's get to it. This one opens with Nashi on Thunder Junction trying to grow a new cactus plant with help from one of his story scrolls. He's frustrated he can't get it right, and a ghostly version of Tamio hovers nearby trying to encourage him, but this only reminds him of what he lost when she fell to the Phyrexians. Nashi dismisses the magic and walks back to town feeling pretty glum. In the next scene, Nashi uses a spy drone to observe people at a train station. He's hoping to collect interesting stories to carry on Tamio's legacy, but all this really does is make him miss her more. Eventually, he hears a pair of slick shots talking about a woman named Lila who seems to have an amplifier, a substance that enhances her own magical powers. Nashi decides this would help strengthen his own story magic, so he goes looking for Lila. The Slickshot gang operates out of a fancy high-rise building called the Voyager Grand, and Nashi makes his way inside and up to the 10th floor, which is off-limits and thus likely to hold the treasure he is after. He makes it past the laughable security measures and finds a glass bottle sitting on a desk, but as he tries to grab it, the world around him shatters like a broken mirror. He freezes in place, terrified, but things quickly return to normal, and he finds himself face to face with Obeka, who he recognizes as a time mage. She asks him who he's working for, and he says nobody, and she doesn't really believe him, but while she's distracted, Nashi tries to nab the potion bottle with one of his drones. Obeka does not take kindly to this, so she uses her magic to recall the bottle, and then she smashes the drone. Nashi tries to use his story magic to weave an invisibility spell around himself, but that fails, just like growing the cactus earlier. Obeka says, well, I can see there's no point in you stealing this potion. It amplifies your powers, but if you don't have any to begin with, it won't really work. She then hits Nashi with another wave of time magic, and he passes out. Actually, he passes backwards through his own memories and revisits a time Tamio told him to be true to himself and not change who he was to impress her or anyone else. Nashi then wakes up and Obeka and the potion are long gone, but Nashi has a renewed self-confidence which he carries into the next scene. Basically, he goes home and builds a bunch of new drones, then comes back to the Voyager Grand and marches right back into Obeka's office. He thanks her for showing him how to embrace his own strengths, and then uses a bunch of holograms combined with a working invisibility spell to confuse Obeka long enough to scamper off with the amplifier, even though he clearly doesn't need it anymore. I mean, the magic was within him all along. He just had to switch from scrolls, like Tamio used, to something more modern, like video camera drones, because that's what he was comfortable with. So, it was neat we got some time with Nashi, and Obeka uses her time magic in a different fashion than Teferi uses his, so that was cool to see. But I don't get why they name drop Lila, and then the big showdown is with a mercenary hired by the Slickshots to protect the amplifier potion, rather than with the Slickshots themselves. I think it would have been more interesting, because both Nashi and the Slickshots would have had their own tricks, and it would have been a battle of showmanship. Nashi and his storytelling magic driven by history versus the Slickshots who live for the moment and want to create the biggest spectacle they can. That would have been a fun showdown. Alas, it was not to be, and so I shall remain the greatest lore mage in all the multiverse. Which I guess means I now have to tell you what happens in the fourth and final side story, A Pleasant Family Outing. So here we go. Remember in the main story when Gisa and Geralf go off to a place called Thief's Folly to find a fabled map to Tarnation? Well, this is that. So it's the only side story that directly connects to the main story, but since we already know the outcome, they find the map and bring it back to Oko, this is really just an opportunity to spend more time with these squabbling siblings. Geralf is worried that being away from Innistrad will dilute his natural zombie magic affinity, so he is using this as an opportunity to study naturalization, meaning what happens to people after they go through an omen path and leave their plane of birth. Gisa, however, has no such concerns. She thinks she's a badass warlock here, there, and everywhere, and she's eager to prove her boring brother wrong by showing him that her magic won't fade just because she left home. The story is broken up with journal entries from Geralf in which he makes observations about his sister and her unusual way of calling ghouls, which seems to still be working fine, even though they have been away from Innistrad for some time. Eventually, the pair make it to Thief's Folly, which turns out to be a bit of a mystery. As Gisa notes, nobody had been to Thunder Junction before the Omen Paths opened, and that was pretty recently, so there shouldn't be this many dead bodies already buried here. Geralf notices that the dates on the gravestones suggest a lot of these people died on other planes and were transported here, though he can't be sure why. This doesn't stop Gisa from starting to dig, but Geralf realizes there are symbols on the stones that form an incantation. At least the story calls it an incantation, but I thought an incantation was a form of spoken magic specifically, not something carved on stones. That would be a rune, right? Anyway, Gisa unearths a giant centipede zombie made of dozens of various corpses tied together, so they run from that, blaming each other all the way. They bump into Stella Lee, a slick shot who was here to pay her respects to a recently buried fellow gang member. She's now annoyed that this giant corpsepede is going to uproot all of the graves, including that of her friend, so she offers to help. Geralf says, well, what I really need is angel blood and some lamp oil, and Stella says, I happen to have both of those right here in my saddlebag, because my gang has been doing a lot of trading in medicinals lately, and anyway, don't ask questions, just take this and fix that. Geralf uses the supplied materials to quickly stitch up a creature of his own, which he uses to fight the massive corpse monster. While that's happening, he encourages his sister to take back her song, meaning undo the ghoul caller spell that brought this thing to life, which she does, but it remains. She then detects another song that isn't hers and isolates it to a crypt. Stella helps her break in, where they find a jar containing a beating heart and a writhing bug that looks a lot like the big one still outside. Gisa smashes that bug and cuts the heart in half with her shovel, which causes the cemetery guardian to break apart. Realizing this crypt was enchanted to protect the map to Tarnation, Gisa and Geralf snatch up their prize and say goodbye to Stella before leaving Thief's Folly and returning to Oko. And that's it. That's what else happens in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. We got 4 side stories that tried to tell us a little more about life on the plane, and while I like that idea in concept, I think the execution here could have been better. Yuma is from one of the supporting commander decks for this set, but other characters who appear there, like Olivia or Gonti, don't appear anywhere in the side stories. Annie gets a chapter, but we already see a lot of her in the main story, and I would argue most of her side story could have been folded into that without losing much. The Nashi story showed him growing up and accepting that he'll never be exactly like Tamio, But even after becoming confident in his own skills, he steals the magical potion anyway, so I'm not sure what the point of that whole story even was. And then the Innistrad siblings? I mean, we already knew how their story would end, with them coming back with a map, so this was really an opportunity to answer some unresolved questions about the plane, like why is there such a huge graveyard for such a recently discovered place? It is never explained who put the map there, or who put the incantation in place to guard the gravesite, or why all these extra bodies were brought here. Instead of answering any of that, we got a lot of playful banter. The same stuff we get on Innistrad with these characters, so not really anything new. This leaves me in a weird spot, because I genuinely love that Magic has a story. I like collecting the legendary cards and learning about who these characters are and what motivates them as they face their own challenges in the multiverse. I also want these stories to have meaning and actually reveal useful information about the characters, locations, and events they describe. There was a definite theme of family across all 4 stories, and I just think they could have done more with that. But what about you? Did you find anything valuable in these adventures, or do you wish we got to hear more about some of the other visitors to this plane in a set loaded with interesting outsiders? Let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, hit up my link for Into the AM and grab yourself something cool to wear from their new spring collection while saving a cool 30% during their sale. Then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya!